The girl gave him half of her supper, even though she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. 3 bitter roots in murky water. That was their entire supper for the 2 of them, and for the dying old woman in the corner. And he looked at this land and knew he could feed the whole village. If only he understood where he'd ended up. But first, there was dust. Han Jiwoo woke up face down in red earth, and it tasted like ashes from a fire that had gone out 100 years ago. He coughed. The air burned his throat like an oven. Above him hung a white, scorched sky without a single cloud. The last thing he remembered was the steering wheel, the road at night, 3 in the morning, darkness, and now a stranger's rags on his body instead of a work jacket, and dust on his teeth. He sits up, rubs a pinch of soil between his fingers, sniffs it, tastes it with his tongue. 0 organic matter, low in salt, sour. Someone treated this soil with the wrong remedy, and it died. Jiwoo knows this taste. He's an agronomist. 5 years working on drought-resistant crops, a dissertation on drip irrigation, 2 patents on hydroponics. And here he stands in the middle of the most terrifying field of his life. No seeds, no water, no tools, and not even a clue where he is. A girl emerges from a crooked clay hut carrying an empty bucket. So thin her cheekbones cut into her skin. She looks about 20, but her eyes are much older. Much older. She looks at him the way one looks at a thief or a ghost. Jiwoo bows low and asks how long it has been since it rained. She whispers softly, 3 years. He looks around. The field stretches to the horizon, and all of it is dead. Red dust, cracks, not a single green. In the distance, more huts just like this one. A dying village on dying land. Inside the hut, it is stuffy and dark. In the corner, an old woman lies on a mat, counting each breath with her ribs. Saehee, that's the girl's name, stokes the fire and tosses 3 dried-up roots into the pot.
That's the whole dinner. She pours 2 bowls. She doesn't pour one for herself. She says she ate this morning. Jiwoo can tell by her eyes that she hasn't eaten. He splits his portion in half and pushes it toward her. She refuses. He shakes his head. She takes it. At night, he lies on a mat and stares at the ceiling. In the far corner, something small rustles. A boy of about 8, curled up in a ball. Saehee's brother. His eyes shine in the dark and don't blink. And then it appears. Right before his eyes, a translucent panel flashes to life, with glowing lines in a language he doesn't know but somehow understands. The heavenly farm system. At first, he thinks it's heat stroke, then a hallucination from dehydration. The panel doesn't disappear. He pokes it with his finger. His finger passes right through it. But the panel unfolds. Soil analysis, seed bank, accelerated growth cycle, breeding perspective. The seed bank stores everything he touched in his past life. Rice, wheat, soybeans, potatoes, tomatoes, radishes, dozens of items. He mentally selects one, radish. A weight appears in his palm. He unclenches his fingers. In his palm are 3 real seeds with rough husks, just like the ones he used to plant in the plots in Suwon. His hands are shaking, not from fear. For the first time in this endless day, he has a direction. He lies there until dawn and makes plans. In the gray light, he goes out into the yard and finds the worst corner of the plot, 2 by 2 meters by the north wall. Not even pigs go there. He presses his palm to the ground. The panel spits out data. Acidity is high, completely depleted. It can be fixed. Ash, charcoal, a little water, and time. He asks Saehee for a handful of ash, a pinch of salt. Salt is more expensive than meat here, and she hesitates but gives it to him. Crushed charcoal from behind the hut. He mixes it all, scatters it over the square, and works it into the topsoil. He takes a bucket and walks to the stream about 2 lees to the east. An hour later, he returns with half a bucket. His shoulder is burning. He pours the water onto the square, and the earth drinks it greedily, as if it had been waiting. He digs 3 holes at the correct distance, exactly 2 centimeters deep. He places a seed in each. He covers them with soil. He covers them with a damp rag torn from the hem of his skirt. He stands up and speaks softly. If there is a sky, let it watch. If there isn't, the radish will look for itself. Saehee stands in the doorway and understands nothing. Over the past 3 years, dozens of strangers have come to the village. Some prayed, others dug, and still others simply asked for food. No one has grown anything. The earth is dead. Everyone knows that. She goes into the hut. By evening, Jiwoo lifts the rag. 3 green sprouts are poking out of the ground. Small, timid, but alive. He touches one with his finger. Firm, warm, growing. The system is working. He hasn't gone mad. Saehee comes out at dawn, sees the greenery, and drops the bucket. At sunset the next day, he pulls 3 white radishes from the ground, each as thick as a wrist, firm, with cold, sweet juice. He washes them with the remaining water, cuts them into thin slices, and salts them lightly. He brings them to Saehee. He says, "Eat this first, then the soup, or you'll collapse." She takes a bowl. She looks at the radish, at her sleeping grandmother. Her brother peeks out from the corner with huge eyes, and tears run silently down Saehee's cheeks. She cried for 3 years out of grief, and knows what it's like. Now it's different. She doesn't know the name for it, but she holds the bowl tightly with both hands, as if letting go would make it all turn out to be a dream. On the 3rd day, Jiwoo planted the entire yard. He had been working since dawn. He walked to the stream twice for water, 2 trips each way, or 4 in total. His feet were rubbed raw with blisters. But he didn't stop. Ash from the hearth, coals from behind the hut, murky water from the stream, and seeds from the toolbox that glowed before his eyes with a soft greenish light. Onions, garlic, early radishes, greens. He planted each crop separately. Onions farther from the wall where the sun lingered longer. Garlic closer to the corner where moisture lingered for half an hour. Radishes next to the spot where radishes had already grown. The soil there was already a little livelier. The system gave him hints. The panel before his eyes displayed moisture, acidity, and nitrogen content. Jiwoo didn't need a lab. All he needed were his hands and 5 seconds. Saehee watched him from the doorway. She didn't help. She didn't get in the way. She just watched. On the 2nd day of work, she came out and silently placed a jug of water next to him. Not for watering, for him, so he could drink. Jiwoo thanked her and drank half. He poured the other half onto the garlic bed. Saehee opened her mouth to say something. She closed it. She went back inside. By the end of the 3rd day, Saehee's yard looked different. Green onion sprouts were pushing through in neat rows. The garlic had sent up its first shoots. The radishes were growing plump underground. Jiwoo could feel it in his palms. The roots were reaching deep down, drawing moisture from the lower layers. The earth was waking up. Slowly, reluctantly, but it was waking up. On the fourth day, the village elder came. Park Dong-soo, 60 years old, skinny as a stick, his face darkened by the sun and worries. He stopped at the fence and stared for a long time at the greenery in Saehee's yard. Then he stepped over the broken gate and walked over to the garden beds. He crouched down. He touched a leaf of green onion. He sniffed it. He rubbed it between his fingers. His face took on a strange expression, like that of a man who sees the impossible. Yet his fingers tell him it is real. He stood up and walked over to Jiwoo. Jiwoo was sitting against the wall, bandaging the calluses on his palms with scraps of cloth. The village elder stood over him. He was silent for a minute. Then he asked who he was. Jiwoo replied that he was an agronomist. The village elder didn't know that word. Jiwoo said he was the one who knew how to grow things. The village elder asked how. Jiwoo showed his palms. With these. The village elder looked at his hands, worn down, in the dirt, covered in blisters. The hands of a working man, not a mage, not a demon, not a charlatan. A man who had carried water for 4 leagues and dug with his bare hands. The village head remained silent for another minute. Then he said that if the tax collectors found out about this, they would strip the village of every last grain in the name of the king, and that if the governor found out, it would be even worse, and that Jiwoo had better not draw attention to himself. Jiwoo replied that he understood. The village head turned and walked toward the gate. He stopped halfway there. He turned around. He looked at the garden beds. Jiwoo silently picked 2 bunches of green onions and handed them to him. The village head took them. He stood there for a moment, tucked the onions into his shirt, said he would keep quiet, and left. Saehee stood in a doorway and saw everything. When the village head left, she approached Jiwoo and for the first time in 4 days spoke on her own. She asked if he would teach her. Jiwoo looked at her. She stood up straight. Her shoulders were squared, her chin slightly raised. In her eyes, not a plea, but a resolve. He nodded. That same evening, he sat her down next to the garden bed and began to explain. He spoke simply, without technical terms. He gestured with his hands. Here is the earth. It is alive. It is tired. It needs to be fed just as you feed your grandmother. Ash is like rice water for a sick person. Charcoal is like a pillow for the back. Water is water. Without it, nothing works. Saehee listened without blinking. Then she asked him to repeat it. He repeated it. She nodded, and the next morning she went out into the yard before him. She had already spread the ash on the new plot. Unevenly, not in the right proportions. But she did it herself. Jiwoo corrected her silently. He didn't scold her. He just moved a handful of ash slightly to the left. She remembered. On the 5th day, talk began in the village. 120 people. Everyone knows everyone. There are no secrets. Saehee's neighbor, Aunt Kim, saw the greenery through the fence. She told her husband. Her husband told the blacksmith. The blacksmith told the carpenter. By the evening of the 5th day, half the village knew that something was growing in Saehee's yard. Some said it was a blessing from heaven, that the gods had finally heard their prayers and sent help. Others said it was unholy, that nothing had grown for 3 years
and suddenly a stranger appeared and the earth came to life. That doesn't happen. Normal people can't do that. So he must be a demon, or a sorcerer, or something worse. A delegation came to see Jiwoo. 3 men. The eldest was Ko Chan-soo, a fisherman from the stream. There hadn't been any fish in the stream for 2 years, but he still went there every morning with his fishing rod, out of habit. Ko Chan-soo stood before Jiwoo and asked him straight out. A sorcerer, a demon, or something else. Jiwoo looked at him calmly. Then he crouched down and took a handful of earth. He rubbed it between his fingers. He showed it to Chang-soo. He said that this earth wasn't dead. It was sleeping. He just knew how to wake it up. Chang-soo looked at him skeptically. Jiwoo held out an onion to him. Fresh, green, with a white, firm root. Chang-soo took it, bit into it, chewed slowly. Something was changing on his face. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a fresh onion. Juice dripped down his chin. He finished chewing, looked at his 2 companions. They were silent. Chang-soo wiped his mouth with his sleeve. He said that whether he was a sorcerer or not, the onion was real. And he left. The other 2 followed him. One turned around at the threshold. There was something new in his gaze. Not yet trust, but a crack in the wall through which light could pass. On the 6th day, Jiwoo decided that Saehee's courtyard wasn't enough. He needed a field, a real field. He walked around the edge of the village, looking for a spot. The system scanned the soil every 10 steps. Everything was bad. Everything was dead. But on the eastern outskirts, he found something. A hollow. Not very deep, about 50 meters long. Remnants of stonework jutted out along the edges. Jiwoo took a closer look. It was a canal. An old irrigation canal. Buried by dust and time. But the walls were intact. The bottom was intact. If he could dig it out and connect it to the stream. Jiwoo sat on the edge of the hollow and thought for a long time. He couldn't do it alone. He needed people. But people didn't trust him. Half of them think he's a demon. The other half are waiting for him to demand payment. He went back to Saehee. He asked if there was anyone in the village who was good at digging. Saehee thought for a moment. She said there was. Charina, the daughter of the former centurion. She usually carries a sword, not a shovel. But her hands are stronger than any man's in the village. Jiwoo asked where to find her. Saehee said that Rina had come to Namgak 3 days ago to sell her father's sword. She was living in the blacksmith shed. She hadn't sold the sword yet. There were no buyers. Jiwoo went to the blacksmith. The shed stood behind the smithy. It was small. The door was wide open. Inside, a girl was sitting on the straw. Her hair was cut short. She was wearing men's clothes. She had a scar across her left eyebrow. Next to her lay a sword in a worn scabbard. She was sharpening it with a stone. Her movements were practiced, mechanical. She looked up at Jiwoo. Her eyes were hard, wary. She asked what he wanted. Jiwoo sat down across from her, right on the ground. He said he needed strong hands, not for battle, for the fields. Rina snorted. She said she wasn't a peasant. Jiwoo nodded. He said he could see that. But he had radishes growing in his yard, and in the village there were 120 people who hadn't eaten their fill in 3 years, and he needed someone who could hold a stake while he tied up the vines. Rina stopped sharpening the sword. She looked at him more closely. She asked what kind of radish it was. Jiwoo said, Come, I'll show you. They went to Saehee. Rena saw the garden beds. She stopped. She bent down. She touched the leaves. She sniffed the soil. She was silent for a long time. Then she straightened up and said that he was either a genius or a madman, but if food because of him, she would stay. On one condition. Jiwoo asked what it was. Rena said that if he tried to take her sword or make fun of it, she would leave. Jiwoo looked at the sword on her belt, a worn hilt, nicks on the guard, her father's. The last thing left from her former life. He said he wouldn't touch it, and that the sword would still come in handy for her, just not in the way she thought. Rena didn't understand what he meant, but she stayed. That evening, Jiwoo divided dinner among the four of them: Saehee, Grandma, little brother, and Rena. The soup wasn't watery anymore. Pieces of radish, green onions, and garlic floated in it. For the first time in a month, Saehee's grandmother ate a full bowl. She looked at Jiwoo with cloudy, elderly eyes. She asked Saehee who this boy was. Saehee didn't answer. She just poured Grandma some more. Little brother sat in the corner and ate his portion, quickly, with both hands, as if he were afraid someone would take it away. Rena ate in silence. She placed her sword nearby. She didn't let it out of her sight. But she ate, down to the last drop. When everyone went to bed, Jiwoo went out into the yard. He stood by the garden bed. The moon lit up the green rows. Onions, garlic, radishes, greens. A small patch of life in the middle of dead earth. Tomorrow, he would start digging the canal. With Rena. Maybe with Saehee. Maybe with someone else. He didn't know if he would save this village. He didn't know if he would save anyone at all. But the seeds were growing, and people were eating. And as long as that was the case, he would keep going. He looked at the moon and thought that in a past life, he would have written about this in a lab journal. Subject of observation, 2x2 plot, degraded soil, ash treatment, positive result, scaling recommended. There was no lab journal here. Here there was dead earth and living people, and 3 little seeds that changed everything. He returned to the hut and lay down on the mat. The system panel flickered before his eyes. He shut it with a familiar thought. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 6 days, he fell asleep immediately. Jiwoo planted the entire Saehee courtyard with onions, garlic, and radishes. Village head Pak found out about the greens and demanded silence so as not to attract the attention of the tax collectors. Charina, the daughter of the former centurion, joined Jiwoo and stayed in Namgok. Jiwoo discovered an old irrigation canal behind the village and decided to restore it. They began digging the canal on the 7th day. Jiwoo stood at the edge of the ravine and looked down. 50 meters of a dust-covered channel. Walls made of old stone. The masonry was cracked in places, but still held. It had been built with care. Whoever had laid this canal knew their craft. Rena stood beside him. She looked at the same hollow. She asked what he intended to do with it. Jiwoo explained simply. The stream was about 2 miles to the east. If they dug from the stream to this canal and cleared the channel itself, the water would flow by gravity. The slope was sufficient. He had checked. Rena asked how he knew about the slope. Jiwoo said he could feel the earth. Rena looked at him for a long moment. She shrugged. She picked up a shovel. They started at the nearest end. The soil was dense, compacted over the years. The first meter took an hour. Rena dug furiously, as if the earth were an enemy.
The shovel sank in with a crunch. Clumps flew off to the sides. Jiwoo worked beside her, slower, more carefully. Every time the shovel uncovered a new layer, he pressed his palm against it and read the soil. Clay here, sand here, roots here, dead but dense. Work around them. By noon they had dug 3 meters. The sun was directly overhead. There was no shade anywhere. Rena stopped.
She stuck the shovel into the ground, wiped her forehead, looked at Jiwoo. He was sitting on the edge of the ditch, bandaging his palms. The calluses had burst, blood mixed with dust. Rena silently pulled a rag from her belt, a clean one, her own. She walked over and bandaged his hands, tightly, skillfully, just like they bandage wounds at the garrison. She didn't say a word. She went back to the shovel. She kept digging. On the 3rd day of the excavation, Ko Chang-soo joined them. That same fisherman. He came silently, without explanation. He took an old hoe and stood next to Rena. He dug with difficulty. He breathed heavily. But he didn't stop. His neighbor came after him. Then another. By the end of the week, 7 men were working on the canal. All men, all thin, all hungry. But they dug. Jiwoo fed them. Every evening, Saehee cooked soup from whatever grew in the yard. Radishes, onions, greens, garlic. The soup was thin, but hot, and it contained food, real food, not roots or bark. The workers ate and came back the next morning. Jiwoo understood what was happening. He wasn't buying their labor. He was feeding them. And they worked, not because they were obligated to, but because for the first time in 3 years, someone was feeding them and asking for help, not obedience. The system confirmed it. When Ko Chang-soo dug next to Jiwoo, the earth responded. Weakly, barely noticeably, but it responded. When one of the workers grumbled that he was wasting his time and dug with irritation, the soil remained silent. Jiwoo remembered this. Trust, conscious work, goodwill. Without it, the system didn't work beyond his own hands. By the 10th day, the canal was half cleared. 25 meters of clean channel. The stone walls glistened in the sun. Jiwoo stood at the bottom and ran his hand over the masonry. The old masters knew their craft. The stones fit tightly together. The joints were sealed with something resembling a clay mortar mixed with rice, a technique several hundred years old. He climbed back up and looked toward the stream. 2, 4 kilometers. The canal from the stream to this channel would have to be dug from scratch. This isn't a job for 7 men with hoes. It's at least a month's work. If the weather holds. If the men don't give up. If the tax collectors don't arrive sooner. In the evening, he sat by Saehee's hut and thought. Rena sat beside him. She was sharpening her sword out of habit. Not because she was planning to fight. She just needed to keep her hands busy. Saehee brought them tea. Bitter. Made from some local roots. But hot. Jiwoo took a sip and asked Rena if she knew how many people in the village were still able to work. Rena thought for a moment. She said there were about 30 men of working age. Of those, a dozen were too weak from hunger. Another dozen wouldn't join because they didn't believe in it. That left 10, plus the 7 who were already digging. 17 people. Jiwoo nodded. 17. 17 would do. If they were fed. He looked at the garden beds in the yard. The onions were growing fast. The garlic was gaining strength. The radishes were almost ready. But that wasn't enough. We need a field. A big field. Barley. Buckwheat. Something that will provide volume. Something that can be boiled, baked, and stored. He opened the system panel. He checked the seed bank. Barley. Buckwheat. Both were in stock. Resource consumption was average. These crops weren't exotic. They were well suited to the local climate. The system wouldn't object. He chose a plot, 1/4 of a hectare south of the village. The soil there was slightly better. Not alive, but not quite dead either. Deep down, traces of the fertile layer still remained. Like embers under the ashes. It needed to be stoked. The next morning, Jiwoo went out to this plot. Saehee was with him, and Rina, and Ko Chang-soo, and 4 others. 8 people on 1/4 hectare of dead land, with 3 shovels and 2 hoes. Jiwoo stood in the middle of the field. He dropped to his knees. He pressed both palms to the ground. He closed his eyes. The panel unfolded to its full width. He could see the entire field, every meter. Here it's acidic. Here it's salty. Here it's hard as stone. Here it's softer. Here it's deeper. Here it's closer to the surface. A map. Detailed. Precise. Like a satellite image from his past life, only not from above, but from within. He opened his eyes. He stood up. He began to mark out the area. Here is ash. Here is coal. Here, mix it to the depth of a palm. Here, to the depth of 2 palms. Here, leave it as is. The earth will handle it on its own. The workers looked at him and didn't understand. He explained to each one separately, simply, specifically. Chang-soo, you go through this strip with a hoe, to this depth, not deeper. Then scatter the ash. This much. A handful per step. Rina, you take that corner over there. It's compacted there. You'll need strength. Break up the top layer. Finely, like crumbs. See, you mix the ash with the coal. In these proportions. 2 handfuls of ash to 1 handful of coal. Everyone had a task. Everyone understood. Everyone worked. Jiwoo walked among them, correcting, demonstrating. Sometimes he picked up a shovel himself. More often he taught. By evening, 1/4 of the field was prepared, loose, with ash, with coal, waiting for water and seeds. 3/4 remained. But it was a start. Saehee stood at the edge of the field and watched. She had been hauling ash and coal all day. Her hands were black. Her face was covered in dust. Her back ached. But she stood there and looked at what they had done. And her eyes were shining. Not from tears. From something else. Maybe from the sun. Maybe not. The next 3 days were spent preparing the field. Jiwoo divided the work into shifts, morning and evening. It was too hot at noon. People were collapsing from the sun. He forbade working at the height of the day. Rina argued. She said she could handle it. Jiwoo said he had no doubt, but a dead worker wouldn't dig a single row. Rina fell silent. She was offended. By evening, she stopped being offended because Jiwoo turned out to be right. 2 people from the morning shift were lying in the shade with wet rags on their foreheads. Heat stroke. Jiwoo gave them water. He made them lie down until sunset. He didn't scold them. By the 4th day, the field was ready. All of it. 1/4 of a hectare of loose tilled soil.
Jiwoo stood at the edge and watched. In his past life, he had sown experimental plots measuring 10 square meters. Here, beneath his feet, there were 2,500 square meters. And every meter he had tilled himself or taught others to till. He took out the seeds, barley, buckwheat. He divided the field in half. The northern part for barley, the store was buckwheat. Between them, a strip for legumes, soybeans. They would replenish the nitrogen in the soil for the next cycle. Crop rotation. Even here.
Even on dead soil. Especially on dead soil.
He sowed them himself, by hand. Every seed at the right depth. Barley 2 centimeters, buckwheat 1.5, soybeans 3. The work took all day. His back ached. His knees wouldn't straighten. But by sunset, the whole field was sown. Jiwoo stood at the edge. He watched the sun sink below the horizon. Red. Angry. Not a single cloud in sight. There won't be any rain. Water only from the stream. So a canal is needed. So digging is needed. So it all comes down to the same thing. People. Trust. Time. 2 days later, the barley sprouted. First a few shoots, then dozens, then hundreds. Green shoots pierced the reddish dust and stretched toward the sky. The buckwheat was a day behind, but also took root. Soybeans on the 3rd day. By the end of the 2nd week, the field was green. Not bright, not lush, but green. Alive. In the middle of a dead province. People came and watched. Not everyone, but many. They stood at the edge and were silent.
Some crossed themselves.
Some shook their heads. One old woman fell to her knees and began bowing to the field. Jiwoo approached her. He helped her up. He said she shouldn't bow to the field, but to her own hands, because they were the ones who had done it. The old woman didn't understand, but she stood up. By the end of the 2nd week, what Jiwoo had both hoped for and feared happened. People came to him from the neighboring village. 2 people, a man and a woman. The man was elderly. The woman was young. His daughter. They had walked perhaps 5 miles along the dead road under the scorching sun. The man could barely stand on his feet. The woman held his hand. They came and stopped at the edge of the green field. The man looked at the barley for a long time. Then he turned to his daughter and said something quietly. She burst into tears. They approached Jiwoo. The man said there were 200 people in their village, that they ate tree bark, that 3 old men had died last week, that they had heard food grew in Namgak, that they had come to ask. Jiwoo looked at him, at his sunken cheeks, at his cracked hands, at his daughter who was crying nearby. He knew he couldn't feed 200 people. His field hadn't yielded a harvest yet. The barley wasn't ripe. The buckwheat was just starting to bloom. In his yard, he had onions, garlic, and radishes. It was barely enough for 120 people. 320 was impossible. But he didn't say no. He said, "Send 2, the smartest ones, the ones who aren't afraid to work and are ready to teach others." He won't give them fish. He'll give them a fishing rod. The man didn't understand the word fishing rod in that context. Jiwoo explained it more simply. He'll teach those 2. They'll come back and teach the rest. He'll give them seeds, show them how to prepare the soil, how to plant, how to water. They would grow it themselves, on their own land, with their own hands. The man stood there thinking. Then he nodded. They left. 3 days later, 2 people arrived. A guy in his 20s, a woman in her 30s. Both skinny, both with eyes in which something desperate burned. Jiwoo looked at them and saw what he was looking for. Not submission, not fear. Readiness. He handed each of them a shovel and started from the very beginning. The earth is alive. It was tired. It needed to be fed. The canal was half finished. The field was turning green. The students were learning. The village was eating. Not to their fill, but they were eating. And every evening, Jiwoo sat by Saehee's hut, looked at the stars, and thought that in a past life he had written articles about drought-resistant varieties. And in this one, he himself had become a drought-resistant variety, planted in the driest soil and sprouting. The barley crop ripened 2 weeks after sowing. The system had accelerated the cycle 200-fold. What usually takes 4 months took 14 days here. The ears stood dense and heavy, golden.
Jiwoo walked between the rows and checked each ear with his hands.
The grain was firm, full. No barren ears. The moisture content was right. Ready to harvest. He announced the harvest, and the whole village came out to the field. Not 17 people. All 120. Even those who thought of him as a demon. Even those who had been hiding in their homes, waiting for him to disappear. When ripe barley stands in the field and the pots at home are empty, even fear gives way to hunger. They reaped with sickles. Those without sickles reaped with knives. Those without knives tore the ears by hand. The ears snapped with a dry, satisfying crunch. The grain poured into skirts and sacks and cupped hands. Children ran between the rows and gathered what had fallen. Every single grain. Not a single one was lost. Jiwoo stood at the edge of the field and watched. Rena worked in the center. She reaped the barley with the same motion she used to swing a sword. Sharp. Precise. Only instead of blood, gold poured from beneath the sickle. Saehee was next to her grandmother. They had carried her grandmother out to the field on a stretcher. She sat at them and sorted through the ears of grain in her skirt. Slowly. With her old fingers. But she sorted them. Saehee's little brother had left the house during the day for the first time. He stood among the ears of grain. The top of his head was barely visible above the barley. His eyes were big. Not frightened. Surprised. He touched the ears of grain, and they swayed at his touch, and he smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in front of Jiwoo. By evening they had gathered everything. They threshed it on spread-out canvas sheets. They winnowed it in the wind. There turned out to be more grain than Jiwoo had expected. Much more. 1/4 of a hectare yielded as much as a whole hectare would under normal conditions. A connection to the land. The plot he had cultivated himself yielded twice as much.
Saehee counted the sacks.
12. Full. Heavy. She counted them again. And again. Then she sat down next to the sacks and sat there for several minutes. Just sat. Resting her hands on the coarse fabric stuffed with grain, as if she couldn't believe they were real. The buckwheat ripened 3 days after the barley. They harvested 8 more sacks. Together with the first harvest of onions, garlic, and radishes from Saehee's yard, it was more than the village had seen in the last 2 years. That evening, Jiwoo made a decision. He went to see the village elder, Pak. He said it was time to organize a communal dinner. The the first in 3 years, for the whole village. Pak looked at him with a heavy gaze. He said that if they gathered everyone around one table and someone saw it and spread the word, it would reach the county seat in a week. Jiwoo replied that it would get out anyway. 200 people in the neighboring village already knew. Soon others would find out too. Hiding was pointless. Better to show that the village was strong, well-fed, capable of defending itself. Not with weapons, with food. Pak was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. They set the table in the square by the well. The well had long since dried up, but the square remained, the center of the village. 10 long, low tables arranged in a row, mats all around. 120 people. Children, old people, everyone. Saehee was in charge of the kitchen. 5 women helped. They cooked porridge from fresh barley. They baked flatbreads from buckwheat flour. They sliced radishes and onions. They crushed garlic with salt. Not fancy, not lavish, but plenty. Enough for everyone. Jiwoo didn't sit at the head of the table. He sat to the side, next to grandmother Saehee, away from the center. Rena sat 2 seats away from him. She placed her sword behind her back, hands on her knees. She looked at the table, at the food, at the people. When everyone was seated, Pak stood up. He cleared his throat. He said a few words. The times were hard, that the heavens had finally taken pity, that they needed to be grateful. He didn't specify to whom. He sat down. They began to pass out the food. Each bowl went from hand to hand. The elders first, then the younger ones. Tradition. Jiwoo made sure the bowls reached everyone. When it was the youngest's turn, something happened that Jiwoo would remember forever. A boy, 5 years old, skinny as a skeleton. His parents had died in the first year of the drought. The village raised him by pooling their resources. Those who could gave a crust of bread. Those who couldn't gave at least a corner to sleep in. The boy received his bowl. White rice. Saehee had cooked the rice specially, from the supply that Jiwoo had grown first, separately, for this table. The boy looked into the bowl. He looked at the white grains. He looked up. He looked at the woman next to him who had been feeding him for the past year. He looked back into the bowl and asked if he could eat it. Not because he doubted it, because he didn't know. He didn't remember what white rice looked like. He was born in a year of drought. He had never seen it. Everyone at the table fell silent, all 120 people. The silence was so thick you could hear the fire crackling under the cauldrons. Jiwoo stood up. He walked along the table. He crouched down next to the boy. He took his spoon. He scooped up some rice. And he said calmly that it was okay, that it was just for him, and that he needed to open his mouth. The boy opened it. Jiwoo put the spoon in his mouth. The boy chewed, slowly. His eyes changed. Something lit up in them, something that hadn't been there before. He swallowed and said one word. More. Jiwoo scooped up a second spoonful. The boy ate it. And a third. And a fourth. He ate and couldn't stop. Not because he was greedy, because for the first time in his life he didn't have to ration every bite. Saehee turned away, covered her face with her hands, her shoulders trembled. Rena sat motionless, but the hand that usually rested on the hilt of her sword dropped. For the first time, she simply dropped to one knee. Elder Pak quietly rose from his seat. He walked around the table. He approached Jiwoo and bowed to the ground. His forehead touched the dust. 60 years old. His whole life he had never bowed to anyone younger than himself. Now he was kneeling before a 27-year-old stranger in a canvas shirt. Jiwoo lifted him up, said it wasn't necessary, that it wasn't him, that it was the earth, that it was the hands of 120 who had dug and sown and watered. Pak stood up. He dusted off his knees. He returned to his seat. He didn't say a word. Dinner continued. People ate. Someone laughed, for the first time in 3 years. Someone was silent. Someone cried quietly. Not out of grief. Children ran between the tables and carried off flatbreads, and no one stopped them because there were enough flatbreads. Enough. The village had long forgotten that word. Today, it remembered. After dinner, Jiwoo sat by the dying fire, alone. Everyone had gone their separate ways. Saehee was clearing the dishes. Rena was helping, silently. They didn't speak. They just worked side by side. Jiwoo stared into the fire and thought. 1 month. 12 sacks of barley. 8 sacks of buckwheat. Onions, garlic, radishes. 1 village. 120 people. That's not enough. The neighboring village is waiting. Behind it, another. And another. Namgak province. Thousands of people. Tens of thousands. He can't feed them all. Not alone. Not with his own hands. But he can teach. 2 students have already returned to their village with seeds and knowledge. If each of them teaches 2 more, and those 2 teach 2 more. Geometric progression. Doubling. He understood that. He knew how to count.
He needs more students. He needs more seeds. He needs more water. He needs a canal. He stood up and walked toward the hut. On the way, he stopped by the field. The barley was gone. It had been harvested clean. But the soil was different. He placed his palm on it. The system showed 3 centimeters of topsoil. A month ago, it was 0. 3 centimeters. The soil remembered his hands, a connection to the earth. The field he had worked yielded more even without the system. He closed the panel. He stood there for a moment. Then he walked on. Saehee was waiting for him by the hut. She stood in the doorway, holding a bowl. She handed it to him. Rice. She had saved him a portion from dinner. Jiwoo looked at the bowl. He looked at Saehee. 3 weeks ago, she hadn't been able to pour herself any soup and had said she'd eaten in the morning. Today, she had fed 120 people, and then she'd saved a bowl for him. He took it. He thanked her. She nodded. She turned away. She went inside. But she paused for a second right at the door, and Jiwoo saw in the darkness that she was smiling. Quietly. With the corner of her lips. Like someone who isn't yet sure they have the right to do so. He ate the rice standing in the doorway. The rice was warm, slightly salty, with pieces of green onion on top. The most delicious rice in his life. In both lives. The next morning, everything changed. Jiwoo woke up to voices, loud ones, strangers. He stepped out of the hut. 3 horsemen stood on the village's main street. Their horses were well fed. Their clothes were clean. Short swords hung at their belts. Their sleeves bore insignia with a coat of arms. Tax collectors. From the district.
Village headman Pak stood beside them. His face was ashen. His hands were clenched into fists. One of the horsemen dismounted. He walked down the street. He peered over the fences. He saw greenery in the yards. He saw sacks by the communal granary. He turned to Pak and said something about the village having to pay off 3 years' worth of arrears right now in grain. Pak was silent. Jiwoo stood by his hut and watched. Rena approached silently. She stood beside him, her hand on her sword. Jiwoo shook his head. No, not like this. 3 armed horsemen. Behind them, the county. Behind the county, the province. Behind the province, the crown. If Rena draws her blade now, there will be 100 soldiers here tomorrow. And the day after tomorrow, nothing will remain of Namgak. Jiwoo stepped forward. He approached the tax collector. He bowed politely, not deeply, just as one is supposed to bow to an official. The tax collector looked down at him, asked who he was. Jiwoo replied that he was the one who had grown this grain. The tax collector smirked, said it didn't matter. The grain belongs to the crown. 3 years of arrears, either the grain now or the people to hard labor. Jiwoo was silent for 3 seconds. Then he asked what they feed people in hard labor. The collector didn't understand the question. Jiwoo repeated it. What do they feed people in hard labor? The collector replied that they feed them porridge, once a day. Jiwoo nodded. He said that hard laborers work 16 hours a day, on porridge, once a day, and drop dead in 3 months. That a single convict is worth 0 to the crown because they don't even give him a funeral. But a single free peasant with a field is worth 10 sacks of grain a year to the crown. Every year, as long as he lives. 20 years is 200 sacks, from a single peasant. There are 120 peasants in the village, 24,000 sacks over 20 years, versus 12 sacks right now. He asked the tax collector which was more profitable for the crown. The tax collector was silent. He wasn't used to peasants calculating faster than he did. The second horseman rode closer. He listened. The third stayed where he was. Jiwoo continued. He said he was ready to pay the tax. Not for 3 years. For 1. The current year. 2 sacks of barley. That's more than any village in the province has paid in the last 2 years. Because the other villages are dead and have nothing to pay with. But Namgak pays, and will pay, if they leave him alone. The tax collector looked at him for a long time. Then he said 3 sacks. Jiwoo said 2.5. The tax collector nodded. They loaded 2.5 sacks onto the horses. They rode off. The village stood and watched. Pak approached Jiwoo. His hands were still shaking. He said that Jiwoo had just saved the village for the 2nd time. The first time with food, the 2nd time with words. Jiwoo shook his head. He said it was math. Pak didn't understand the word, but he nodded. After the collectors left, the village breathed a sigh of relief. But Jiwoo didn't relax. 2.5 sacks isn't the end. It's the beginning. Now the county knows there's grain in Namgak, knows there's someone growing it. The information will go up the chain. To the governor. Further. Time was running out. He gathered those who had worked with him from day 1. Saehee, Rena, Ko Chang-soo, 4 others. 8 people in Saehee's hut that evening by the light of an oil lamp. Jiwoo was drawing on the floor with charcoal. Lines, squares, arrows. A plan. First, the canal,
Without water, there won't be a second harvest. Half the channel has been cleared. Half remains, plus the approach from the stream. It needs to be finished by the end of the month. Second, new fields. 1/4 of a hectare isn't enough. We need a whole hectare, at least. Better yet, 2. Third, students. 2 have returned to their village. We need more. 2 from each village. Fourth, the well. The old well on the outskirts. Maybe it's not dry. Maybe it's just filled in. We need to check. Rena listened and nodded. She understood the structure. A military man's daughter. Breaking things down into tasks.
Allocating resources. Logistics. Different words, but the same idea. Chan-su listened and frowned. Too much, too fast, not enough people. Everyone was exhausted. Jiwoo said he knew. That's why there was one priority. The canal. Everything else came later. Without water, the rest didn't make sense. The next morning they dug. Now there were more of them. After dinner and after the collectors left empty-handed, people believed. Not everyone, but enough. 23 people went out to the canal. Jiwoo assigned them to sections. Each had their own stretch. Each had a specific task. Rena commanded the right flank. Chan-su the left. Jiwoo walked between them, checking the depth and the angle of the walls. Saehee brought water to the workers, twice a day, back and forth, 4 times each way. She didn't complain, not once. Jiwoo noticed she had lost even more weight. She gave her portion of food to those who were digging. He approached her in the evening. He said that if she collapsed, there would be no one to carry water, no one to cook soup, and no one to look after Grandma. She replied that she wouldn't collapse. He said it wasn't up for discussion, and that tomorrow she would eat 3 times. She looked at him. Something flashed in her eyes. Surprise. Or something else. She nodded. The next day she ate 3 times. On the 8th day of work, the unexpected happened. One of the diggers fell through. The ground beneath him gave way and he fell into a pit 2 men tall. A scream. Commotion. Rena was the first to run over. She leaned down. The man was lying at the bottom, moaning. His leg was twisted. Not broken, but dislocated. They pulled him out with ropes. Jiwoo climbed down into the pit himself. He pressed his palm against the wall of the collapse. The system unfolded. He saw what he hadn't seen from above. An underground cavern. An old one. Man-made. The walls were lined with stone. The same as the canal, only deeper. Much deeper. It was part of an ancient irrigation system. Not a canal, a reservoir. Underground. For storing water in case of drought. The builders of this canal had planned for everything. They knew a drought would come. Maybe not this one, some other one. And they prepared. Jiwoo stood in the pit and looked at the stone walls that were several hundred years old. He ran his hand over them. Smooth, cold, dry at the bottom. But the walls were slightly damp. Deep down there was water. Not on the surface, not in the stream, in the earth itself. Deep groundwater that the drought hadn't reached. It was far down, 20 meters, maybe 30. But it was there. He climbed back up, gathered everyone, explained what he'd found. An old reservoir. Groundwater. If we dig down and connect it to the canal,
The village will have a source that doesn't depend on the stream, a constant one, a reliable one. Chansu asked how deep to dig. Ju said 20 meters, maybe more. Chansu whistled. 20 meters down, by hand. No equipment, no experience. Ju said he knew, that it would take a long time, that it would be hard, but that it was water, forever. Not a bucket from the stream, not half a bucket after walking 4 steps. Water, here, in the village, forever. The people were silent. Then Rena said she'd dug trenches at the garrison and hadn't gone deeper than 3 meters. But she'd try. Chansu said he was a fisherman, not a miner. But if there's water there, he's in. One by one, people nodded. They decided to dig in 2 shifts, one on the canal, the other on the well. Ju divided the people, 10 on the canal, 13 on the well. He put himself on the well. His presence is more important there. The system has to read the rock at every meter of depth. One wrong strike, and the walls could collapse. They started the next morning. The first meter was easy. The second was harder. The third, even harder. The soil compacted with every blow. The shovels bent. The hose dulled. Ju went down every hour. He placed his palm on the ground. He read. Stone here, go around to the left. Clay here, soft, can be broken through. A root here, old, thick. From a tree that died long ago, but the root remained. Chop it. On the 5th day of digging the well, Ju stood at the bottom of a 7-meter deep pit. The walls were reinforced with stones from the old masonry. They held. Above him was a square of sky. Small. Distant. Rena leaned over from above. She asked how things were going. Ju raised his palm from the ground. Damp. Not wet, but damp. Close. He shouted up that there were another 10 meters, maybe 12. Rena relayed this to the others. Someone groaned. Someone cursed. But they kept digging. Around the same time, another event took place. A new group of students arrived in the village. 4 of them, from 2 different villages. Among them was a girl, small, quiet, with a bundle of herbs at her belt. Oh, Ha-in, the daughter of the village healer. She was 19 years old, and she talked to plants. Jiwoo noticed her on the very first day. She was standing by the onion patch in Saehee's yard, whispering something as she leaned over the leaves. The other students looked at her as if she were strange. Jiwoo approached. He asked what she was doing. Ha-in blushed. She said she was talking. Jiwoo asked to whom. She pointed to the onions. She said that the one on the very end wasn't doing well. Its roots were weak. It was cramped next to its neighbor. It needed to be transplanted farther away. Jiwoo crouched down. He placed his palm on the ground next to the bulb. The system confirmed it. The root system is compressed. The neighboring plant is taking up moisture. It needs to be separated. He looked at Hyun. She saw this without the system, without the panel, without soil analysis. She just saw it, or heard it, or felt it. He asked how she knew. Hyun hesitated. She said that plants talk, not with words, but she hears them. She always has. Her father said she was strange. The neighbors said she was strange. Everyone said so. Ju remained silent. Then he sat down next to her on the ground right by the garden bed. And he said that what she was doing was called observing phenological signs. That in his world, books had been written about it.
that there was a whole science about how plants interact with one another. Companion planting. Some plants help others, others get in the way. And people who can sense this are more valuable than any tool. Saehee listened to him with her mouth agape. Her eyes were huge, wet. No one in her life had ever told her that her strangeness was a talent, that there was science behind it, that she wasn't a crazy country girl who feels sorry for nettles, but a person with a rare and valuable gift. She didn't say a word. She just nodded. And from that day on, she didn't leave Jiwoo's side for a moment. She memorized everything. Every word, every movement, every explanation.
When Jiwoo talked about nitrogen and phosphorus, she didn't understand the terms, but she understood the essence. The earth is hungry. It needs to be fed. With this much, like this. She was the best student of them all, not because she was the smartest, but because she listened to the earth just as Jiwoo read it through the system, only without the system, a pure gift. Rena looked at Ha-in with suspicion for the first 2 days. Then she saw her crouching for half an hour, transplanting a small buckwheat sprout to a new spot, whispering to it to be patient. And she stopped being suspicious. She just said that now there were 2 crazy women in the village, her and this one with the herbs. Saehee smiled. Silently, she handed Ha-in a bowl of soup. Ha-in took it, sniffed it, said the soup was missing a certain herb that grew on the outskirts and made the flavor milder. Saehee looked at her with interest. The next day, they went together to look for that herb. They returned an hour later, both covered in dust, both with their hands full of some kind of stems, both smiling. Jiwoo watched them from the well, 7 meters deep. 13 people are digging. 4 students are breaking ground. Saehee and Ha-in are gathering herbs. Rena is supervising the excavation. Chang-soo is hauling stones to reinforce the walls, and he stands in the middle of it all in a canvas shirt, dirt under his fingernails, thinking that in a past life he must have led a 4-person lab and thought it was difficult. On the 10th day of digging the well, at a depth of 12 meters, Jiwoo struck with his shovel, and it went in softly, like butter. He stopped. He pressed his palm against it. The system lit up. An aquifer, 2 meters below, a layer of sand and gravel, saturated, full. The water was right beneath him. He shouted up for a pickaxe. For the next 2 hours, he carefully chipped away at the bottom, layer by layer, centimeter by centimeter. At 13 meters, the sand turned wet. At 14, water began to seep from beneath the pickaxe. Murky, cold. He stopped. The water was rising, slowly, but it was rising. It filled the bottom of the well like a quiet, silent guest who had long awaited an invitation. Jiwoo stood 14 meters down, ankle-deep in water, and looked up. A small square of sky. People's faces at the edges. He shouted a single word. Water. They screamed up above. Someone cried. Someone laughed. Rena leaned over the edge and yelled at him to get out immediately before he drowned. He laughed. 14 meters deep, ankle deep in Namgak's first water in 3 years. He laughed. When they pulled him up, the whole village was already standing around. The news spread instantly. Water. In the village. Their own. Not from the stream 4 li away. Their own. People peered into the well. Someone lowered a bucket on a rope, pulled it up. Murky. With sand.
but water. Real water.
The old woman who used to bow to the field now bowed to the well.
Jiwoo didn't stop her. Let her. It's okay with the well. Saehee stood nearby. She held a bucket in her hands. That very one. The empty wooden bucket he'd seen her with on the first day. She looked at the well. She looked at the bucket. She walked to the edge, lowered it, pulled it up. Full. Heavy. Water was spilling over the edge. Saehee pressed the bucket to her chest. The water was soaking her clothes. She didn't notice. She stood there, holding it. 2 buckets of water. One empty 4 weeks ago, one full now. And between them, a whole life. In the evening, Jiwoo sat alone by the well. The water at the bottom glistened in the moonlight. Tomorrow he needed to reinforce the walls, build a gate, put a lid on it, connect it to the canal. A week's worth of work. But there was water. Now he could sow the second field, and the third. Now he could take on more students. Now he could breathe. He leaned back and looked up at the sky. Stars. Bright. Cold. Alien. Not his stars, not his sky. But under this sky, he had dug a well and fed 120 people, and taught a girl who could hear plants, and hugged a boy who had never tasted rice. And tomorrow there will be a new day, and the day after tomorrow. And he will plant and dig and teach until the earth remembers what it means to be alive. He closed his eyes, fell asleep right by the well. Saehee came out an hour later, saw him, brought a blanket, covered him, stood nearby, and left. While digging a canal, the workers fell into an underground reservoir of an ancient irrigation system, and Jiwoo discovered deep groundwater. They dug the well to a depth of 14 meters and reached the water. Oh-hyun, the shaman's daughter, joined the students and proved capable of sensing the condition of plants without any system. For the first time in 3 years, the village had its own water source. The well began to flow on the 3rd day after the aquifer was tapped. Chan-soo, along with 2 carpenters, built a gate from old logs. They wove a rope from fibers that Hyun found on the outskirts. The blacksmith carved the lid from a single piece of oak, heavy, solid, so that neither dust nor dirt could get inside. Jiwoo personally checked every fastening. The well walls were reinforced with stones from old masonry, a double layer, with a layer of compacted clay in between, so it wouldn't crumble. The water settled for 2 days. It went from murky to clear, cold, pure. Jiwoo drew the first bucket. He brought it to his lips. He drank slowly. The water had a slight mineral taste. Iron, calcium. Good water. Living water. He passed the bucket to Saehee. She drank. Passed it to Rina. Rina drank. Passed it to Chang-soo. And so on in a circle. 23 people. 1 bucket. Everyone took a sip and passed it on. No one drank more than 1 sip. No one asked for more. There was no need. Now they had to connect the well to the canal. Jiwoo mapped out the route from the well to the cleared channel, 120 meters. There's a slope, small but sufficient. If we dig a trench and line the bottom with stones, the water will flow by gravity. Not fast, a thin trickle, but constantly, around the clock. That would be enough to fill the old channel to working level in a week, and from there, the water will flow to the fields.
They dug for 6 days, a trench from the well to the channel, narrow, a palm's width, 2 palms deep. The bottom was stone, the walls were clay. Primitive, but Jiwoo knew that the primitive lasts longer than the complex. In his past life, the most reliable irrigation systems in the world were built 2,000 years ago. Without computers, without concrete, stone and clay and an understanding of slope. That was enough back then. It's enough now, too. On the 7th day, they opened the channel. Water from the well flowed down the groove, slowly, lethargically, as if hesitating. Then faster. It found the slope. It ran, a thin, glistening thread across the stone bottom. It reached the old channel. It spread out along it. The stone darkened with moisture. For the first time in years. Jiwoo stood at the edge of the channel and watched as the water filled the cracks in the masonry. The ancient builders wouldn't have minded. Their work was serving a purpose again. By the end of the 2nd week, the channel was filled up to the knees. The murky water stood between the stone walls and glistened in the sun. Jiwoo dug 3 branches from the channel out to the fields. Each had a stopper, a simple stone on a rope. Lift the stone, the water flows. Lower it, it stops. Rough, but it worked. Now the fields received water without anyone having to haul buckets for 4 miles. Saehee no longer went to the stream. She stood by the canal and distributed the water among the beds. She scooped, she poured, she made sure every plot got its share. Jiwoo showed her how to tell how much was needed. If the soil was dark, it was enough. If the soil was light, it needed more. Simple. She remembered it the first time. From the 2nd field on, Jiwoo planted a full hectare. Barley, buckwheat, soybeans. Plus something new. Potatoes. From the seed bank. The system's resource consumption is higher. Potatoes had never grown in these latitudes. For the system, they're exotic. But Jiwoo knew the potatoes would save more lives than everything else combined. Calories, volume, storage, low maintenance. In his past world, potatoes saved Ireland, saved Prussia, saved half of Europe. Here, they would save Namgak. He planted them himself, each tuber in a hole, 10 centimeters deep, 30 centimeters apart, in rows. Even rows. Han followed behind and corrected him. Where Jiwoo placed a tuber a little deeper, she dug it up and planted it shallower. She said that tuber was cramped. It needed air. Jiwoo checked it through the system. She was right. The soil was denser there. It was harder for the roots. Shallower meant easier. He looked at her. She was kneeling in the dirt with dirty hands and a happy face, like a child who had found a game to play. He said she needed a name. Not her. Her gift. She looked at him blankly. He said that in his world, people with such a gift were called phytopathologists. She tried to repeat the word. She couldn't. Rena, who was standing nearby and listening, said it was easier to sharpen a sword than to pronounce that word. Han laughed, quietly, covering her mouth with her hand, dirt on her cheek, grass in her hair. Jiwoo thought that if the system gave him an analysis in 5 seconds, Han gave it in 3, and without a panel. 2 weeks later, the potatoes sprouted. Green bushes rose above the ground, thick and sturdy. The leaves were dark, wide. The stems were thick. The village had never seen such a plant. People came up and looked. They touched the leaves. They sniffed them. They asked what it was. Jiwoo explained. A root vegetable.
It grows underground. Plenty of it. Filling. You can boil it. You can bake it. You can store it all winter. People nodded. They didn't quite believe it. Underground food seemed strange to them. But after the barley and buckwheat, they didn't argue anymore. If this stranger says there's food underground, then there's food underground. Around the same time, a second wave of students arrived. 6 of them. From 3 villages. All thin, all hungry. All with the same look in their eyes. Desperate hope. That little flame that burns when everything else has already gone out. Jiwoo housed them in empty huts. There were plenty of empty huts in Namgak. People were dying or leaving. The houses remained. Now the students had settled into them. Jiwoo structured the training the same way he had structured lab sessions at the institute. Theory in the morning, practice in the afternoon, review in the evening. Only instead of a lecture hall, there was a field. Instead of a blackboard, there was the ground. Instead of chalk, there was coal. He drew diagrams right on the trampled patch of ground in front of Saehee's hut. The nutrient cycle, the principle of crop rotation, planting depth for different crops, signs of disease, signs of water shortage, signs of salt excess. He explained in simple words, no technical terms. Ha-In translated. She already knew enough to translate his knowledge into a language the locals could understand. Not nitrification, but feeding the soil. Not pH, but acidic or fresh. Not mycorrhiza, but the root's fungal friends. Rena sat through these lectures with a sword on her lap. She listened, not because she was going to become an agronomist, because she liked listening to Jiwoo speak. When he spoke about the earth. His voice softened. His hands moved more freely. His eyes burned. He was neither a commander nor a preacher. He was a teacher, and everyone could see that. One evening, Rena stayed behind after the lecture. Everyone else had left. Jiwoo was erasing the charcoal lines from the ground with his foot. Rena approached. She stood beside him. She was silent. Then she said she wanted to ask him something. Jiwoo nodded. She asked why. Why he was doing this. Why does he teach? Why does he feed them? Why does he dig? He's a stranger here. He could have left. He could have sold his gift for gold. He could have gone to the capital and lived at court. Why here? Why this village? Why these people? Jiwoo thought for a long time. Then he said that in a past life, his father had been a farmer. Every year during the rainy season, the field would flood. And every year his father would cry. Not because he felt sorry for himself, but because the rice was ruined. And that meant the old woman next door would be eating thin porridge this winter. His father didn't cry over his own rice. He cried over someone else's hunger. Jiwoo went to study so his father wouldn't have to cry anymore. And here he is, a different world, a different land, but the same tears, the same empty bowls, the same eyes. He can't leave, not because he doesn't want to, but because if he leaves, he'll betray his father a second time. The first time he betrayed him was when he fell asleep at the wheel and didn't come home. Rena listened. Her face was expressionless. Only the scar across her eyebrow was slightly whiter than usual. She said nothing. She turned away. She left. That night, Jiwoo went out into the yard and saw her. She was sitting by his door,
with a sword on her lap, her back to the wall. Her eyes closed, but she wasn't sleeping. He asked what she was doing. She replied that she had come out to get some air. He looked at her. She didn't open her eyes. He went back into the hut. He didn't argue. From that night on, she sat by his door every evening, every night. She'd gone out for some fresh air. The same thing over and over. A month after the first harvest, a man arrived in the village on horseback, alone, without guards, clean clothes, a fine horse, a bureaucrat's hat. County official Cho Yan-ho, middle-aged, a tired but intelligent face, piercing eyes. He looked around. He noticed everything. Greenery in the yards, people in the fields, children who weren't hiding but running about, smoke from the chimneys. In a dead province, that meant one thing: food, fire, life. Cho dismounted at the village headman's house. Park came out to meet him. He turned pale. A county official is worse than tax collectors. Tax collectors take grain. An official takes people. Cho bowed to the headman, politely, not condescendingly. He asked to be shown the village. Pak led the way, in silence. With every step, Cho saw more. Fields of barley, vegetable patches, a canal with water, a well with a pulley, schoolchildren in the field, a woman kneeling and whispering something to a woman in a headscarf, Renu sharpening shovels at the smithy, Saehee serving lunch to the workers from a large cauldron. Cho stopped by the cauldron. He looked inside. Porridge. Thick, with chunks of potato, with greens. The smell was so strong it made Cho's stomach growl. He'd been traveling here for 4 hours and had had only rice water for breakfast. Saehee looked at him. She looked at Pak. Pak nodded almost imperceptibly. She scooped up a full bowl and held it out to the official. Cho took it. He ate standing up, slowly. The porridge burned his mouth. It was his first time trying potatoes. He chewed and couldn't figure out what it was. Soft, filling, warm on the inside. He finished eating. He set the empty bowl on the edge of the pot. He turned to Pak. He asked who had made all this. Pak remained silent. He had promised Jiwoo to keep quiet. But Cho was waiting, and Pak realized that silence was worse than an answer. If the official decided the village was hiding something dangerous, he would call in soldiers. Better to show him himself. He led Cho to the field. Jiwoo was there, standing among the barley, checking the ears of the second crop. His shirt was wet with sweat, his hands in the soil. He saw the official and stood up straight. He bowed. Cho looked at him. Young, thin, tanned, hands of a laborer. Intelligent eyes. He didn't look like a peasant. He didn't look like a mage. He didn't look like anyone Cho had seen in his 20 years of service. Cho asked his name. Jiwoo gave it. Cho asked where he was from. Jiwoo replied, "From far away." Cho asked how all of this came to be. The fields, the well, the canal. How? Jiwoo was silent for a moment. Then he said simply, "I know how to grow things." Cho looked at him for another minute. Then he nodded. He said that by law he was obligated to register Jiwoo as a state peasant. That meant being tied to the land,
a ban on travel, mandatory grain deliveries to the treasury. In effect, property of the crown. Jiwoo listened. His face was calm. He had been expecting this. He knew it would come, sooner or later. He asked Cho one thing. He asked if he had ever eaten fresh bread made from barley grown in Namgak. Cho said he had just eaten porridge. Jiwoo said porridge wasn't bread. He turned to Saehee. She was already standing behind him. She had heard everything. Jiwoo asked for bread. She left and returned 20 minutes later. A flatbread, hot, made from barley flour, with green onions inside. A golden crust. The smell was so strong that Cho swallowed without parting his lips. Jiwoo took the flatbread, broke it in half. He held out one half to Cho, put the other half back. Cho took it, took a bite, chewed. His eyes closed. He stood in the middle of the field, ate fresh bread, and the wind ruffled his official cap, and his face was changing. Slowly. Like the earth in the rain. Something was softening. Something old and hard was cracking from within. He finished chewing, opened his eyes, looked at his hands, crumbs on his fingers. He brushed them off onto the ground. He looked at Jiwoo for a long time. Then he said quietly that he wouldn't file a report, that he'd tell the county that there was nothing special in Namgak, just an ordinary village, ordinary peasants. 2 bowls of porridge and 3 rows of onions. Nothing worth paying attention to. But, he raised a finger, but if in 6 months the province finds out, and it will find out, then there's nothing he can do. His authority ends there. Above the county is the governor. Above the governor is the court. You can't buy your way out of trouble there with a flatbread. Joe nodded. He said 6 months is a long time. In 6 months, you can sow 3 fields, train 20 people, restore 2 canals, build up a stockpile. And when the governor arrives, it will be harder for him to take away what already belongs to hundreds of people. Cho looked at him. Then he smiled. For the first time during the entire visit. He said that Joe was either very smart or very naive, and that he hoped for the former. He mounted his horse. He rode away. At the village gate, he turned around. He looked at the green fields. He shook his head and spurred his horse on. When he disappeared behind the hill, Rena stepped out of the shadows. She had been standing there the whole time, with a sword, just in case. She walked up to Jiwoo. She said he was an idiot, that you can't trust officials, that Cho would be back with soldiers in a week. Jiwoo shook his head. He said he wouldn't be back. Rena asked how he knew. Jiwoo said he'd seen his eyes when he was eating bread. A man with eyes like that doesn't send soldiers. Rena snorted. She said Jiwoo knew the land better than he knew people, and she went off to sharpen her sword. But that night she didn't sit by his door. She sat by the village gate until dawn. Cho didn't return. Not in a week, not in 2, not in a month. Rena didn't apologize, but she began sharpening her shovel more often. The second month began with the village feeling cramped. Not from people, from tasks. The canal was working. The well was providing water. The fields were turning green. The students were learning. Everything was moving forward. But Jiwoo saw what the others didn't. He saw the limits. 1 well for 120 people, plus the students, plus the fields, that wasn't enough. The water was disappearing faster than it was coming in. The water level in the well had dropped by a meter in 2 weeks. Not critical, but the trend was bad. Second,
the seed bank. Every time Jiwoo took seeds out of the system, he felt the resource dwindling. Not quickly, but noticeably. Rice cost twice as much as barley on the internal scale. Potatoes, 3 times as much. The more exotic the crop for the local climate, the greater the resource cost. So we need to move away from system seeds toward our own. Develop local varieties, crossbreeding, selecting, breeding. Third, people. 23 workers and 8 apprentices make 31 people. Of those, 20 actively help. The rest come and go, unreliable, tired, still doubting. 30 people for 1.5 hectares is pushing it. We need more. Jiwoo gathered his inner circle in the evening. Saehee, Rina, Ha-in, Chang-soo. 5 of them, 6 including him. He laid out the plan. First, a second well, on the western side of the village. The system showed that the aquifer runs in a wide band from east to west, so it's worth a try. Second, our own seed stock. Select the best ears of grain from the current harvest. Dry the grain separately. Store it. Don't eat it. This is for future crops. Third, division of responsibilities. He can't be everywhere. We need people in charge of specific areas. Saehee is responsible for the kitchen and food distribution. Rina for security and earthworks. Ha-in for plant health and breeding. Chang-soo for water supply. Everyone nodded, except Rina. Rina asked who we were guarding against. Jiwoo replied that he didn't know yet, but he could sense it. When a living spot appears in the dead earth, it attracts not only the hungry, it also attracts those who want to take it. Rina nodded. She understood that. The next day, Han began selecting seeds. Jiwoo showed her how. A breeder's eye. He looked at an ear of grain and saw its hidden properties. Drought resistance, frost resistance, yield, grain quality. He couldn't pass this gift on to Han, but he could describe what he saw, and she memorized it. This ear of grain, the kernels are larger, the stalk is thicker, the leaves are darker. It's stronger. Take this one, not this one. The grain is small. The stalk is thin. It was sick. Don't take it. Han listened and touched each ear with her hands. She pressed them to her cheek. She sniffed them. After 3 days, she began selecting them herself, without his prompting. 9 out of 10 matched what the system saw. The 10th one, Han chose better. She sensed what the system didn't show. Something elusive, something that couldn't be measured in numbers. Jiwoo called it intuition. Hyun called it a voice. The plant says, "Take me." She hears it. By the end of the week, they had selected the seed stock, 3 little bags, small, but priceless. The best grains from the best ears of corn, local, adapted, not from the system, their own. Jiwoo kept them in a dry corner of Saehee's hut, under lock and key. Rina personally checked the lock every evening. They began digging the second well a week later. Jiwoo found a spot on the western edge. The system indicated an aquifer at 16 meters, slightly deeper than the first one. But there was water. 10 people dug. Chang-soo was in charge. Jiwoo went down every day to check the direction. This time it went more smoothly. Experience. The first well had taught them. They reinforced the walls right away, stone by stone, layer by layer. Chang-soo worked with confidence. He no longer said he was a fisherman, not a miner. He was both. And something new as well, someone who hadn't existed 3 months ago. On the 10th day, they struck an aquifer. Water came at 16 meters. Slightly murkier than the first, but it came. The village no longer screamed or cried. It simply nodded, accepted. Water. Another one. Good. Normal. That's how it should be. Jiwoo noticed this. People were getting used to it. Getting used to what the earth provided. That there was water. That the ears of grain were growing. You get used to good things quickly. That's not a bad thing. It means that Namgak is ceasing to be a miracle and becoming the norm. And the norm lasts longer than a miracle. In the middle of the second month, So Min-ji arrived in the village. The daughter of the head of the Merchants Guild from a neighboring county. 21 years old. Dressed expensively but practically. A traveling cloak of fine fabric. Leather boots. A small abacus hanging from her belt. Her face bore the expression of someone accustomed to counting everything she sees. People, houses, sacks, distances. She did not come alone. With her were two porters carrying bundles. Goods, fabrics, salt, needles. Trifles that in this dead province are worth their weight in silver. Min-ji stopped at the edge of the field. She looked at the barley. She looked at the potatoes. She looked at the people working in the field. The abacus clicked between her fingers. She counted. 2 clicks. 3. 5. She finished counting. She approached the village headman, Pak. She introduced herself. She said her father had sent her to scout the market, to see if there was anything for sale in Namgak, to see if there was a demand for her goods. Standard market research. Pak led her to Jiwoo. Min-ji looked at him and assessed him. Young, not wealthy. The hands of a laborer. Poorly dressed. But he has fields, and people listen to him, and the grain is growing. She made an offer. Barley at the standard price, 5 mon per sack. Jiwoo looked at her. He asked what the standard price for a sack of barley was in the capital. Min-ji blinked. She answered 25 mon. Jiwoo nodded. He asked why she was offering 5. Min-ji hesitated. She said it was for delivery, expenses, risks, the usual markup. Jiwoo said that the usual markup was double, not 5 times, and that he was offering something else. Not a sale, an exchange. Barley for salt, sack for sack, by weight. Min-ji did the math. The abacus clicked quickly. She looked up. There was respect in her eyes. The first farmer in her entire trading life who knew the prices. She said that bag for bag wasn't profitable for her. Jiwoo said it wasn't profitable now, but in 2 months he would have 10 bags. In 6 months, 50. In a year, 200. And if Min-ji became Namgak's sole trading partner, the volume would cover the margin. Min-ji calculated. For a long time. The abacus clicked and clicked. She looked up. She said she agreed, but on one condition. She would stay in the village for a week. She wanted to see it with her own eyes. Jiwoo agreed. Min-ji stayed for a week, then 2, then 3. On the 4th week, she came to Jiwoo in the evening, abacus at her belt, a serious expression. She said she had recalculated everything: yields, expenses, routes, logistics, and that it was more profitable for her not to trade with Namgak, but to trade on Namgak's behalf, to become his sales representative, to take over all external deals, purchases, sales, routes, contracts. She knows the markets, knows the prices, knows the people.
Jiwoo doesn't. He doesn't have time. He's busy with the land. Let him handle the land. She'll handle the trade. Jiwoo listened. Then he asked why. Why does she need this? The daughter of the guild leader, a wealthy family. Why sit in a dusty village counting sacks? Minji fell silent. The abacus stopped clicking. She said quietly that her father had taught her to trade her whole life. Buy cheap, sell high.
Cheat before you're cheated. She knows how. She's good at it. And she hates it. Because every deal ends with someone losing. But here, for the first time, she saw a deal where both sides won. Joe gives grain. The village is well fed. Minji takes the grain to the county. The county is fed. Everyone is happy. No one is cheated. She didn't know that could happen. Now she knows. And she doesn't want to go back. Joe was silent. Then he said one thing. He said she didn't need to prove anything. Not to her father, not to herself, not to him. She just needed to calculate whether it was more profitable to transport the barley to Songju or to Haedong. She'd be better at it than he was. Minji picked up the abacus. She calculated. She calculated again. And again. 3 times. Not because she'd lost track, but because she didn't believe they'd asked her to calculate. Not because there was no one else, but because she was the best at it. She said, Haedong. The road is longer, but the price is 40% higher. Taking delivery costs into account, the net profit is 12 mun more per sack. Jiwoo nodded. He said that was excellent. Minji put away the abacus. Her hands were trembling slightly. She quickly hid them behind her back. She left. From that day on, she didn't leave Namgok. She sent her father a letter with a business proposal. Formal, precise, with figures. Her father replied 2 weeks later, in one word. Agreed. Minji became the 4th. Saehee, Rina, Ha-in, Minji. 4 women surrounding one man. Each in her place, each with her role. Kitchen and warehouses, security and land, plants and breeding, trade and logistics. Jiwoo stood in the center and felt Namgok's system taking shape. Not because he had planned it, but because the right people came and fell into place where they were needed. Like seeds that find the right depth on their own. All that was needed was not to interfere. By the end of the 2nd month, Namgok was feeding itself. Completely. Without supplies. Without outside help. 3 fields. 2 wells. A canal. A warehouse with a 2-month supply. 12 students trained in basic agricultural techniques. 4 of them had already returned to their villages with seeds and knowledge. Saehee's grandmother got up from her mat for the first time in a year. She made it to the threshold. She sat in the sun. She breathed. Saehee's little brother began to come out of the corners. He wasn't hiding. He walked around the village. He looked at the fields. Once, Ju saw him standing by a row and touching the barley leaves. Gently, with his fingertips. As if afraid they would disappear. Ju walked over, sat down next to him, said nothing. The boy looked at him, for the first time, without fear. Said the leaves were warm. Ju nodded. He said it was because they were alive. The boy thought about it. Then he asked if he could plant some too. Ju took a seed out of his pocket. A radish.
He placed it in the boy's palm. He showed him where to poke his finger into the ground. He showed him how to place it, how to cover it with soil. The boy did everything exactly as instructed. Slowly. Seriously. He covered it with soil, watered it from a small bucket, stood up, looked at Jiwoo. His eyes were huge, a question in them. "It will grow." Jiwoo nodded. "It will grow." The boy nodded in response and walked away. Not to the corner, out onto the street, to the other children. Saehee stood around the corner. She saw everything. She pressed her fist to her lips. She closed her eyes. She stood there like that. She opened her eyes. She went to make dinner. Jiwoo divided the duties among his inner circle and dug a second well. Ha-in began independently selecting seeds for the local seed bank. So Min-ji, the merchant's daughter, came to trade, but stayed forever, and became responsible for Namgok's trade and logistics. Saehee's little brother planted a seed with his own hands for the first time. In the 3rd month, the silence ended. Jiwoo had been waiting for this. He had been preparing. But it didn't come from where he thought. Not from the governor, not from the crown. From the alchemists. The first sign was a stranger. He came to the village on foot. He called himself a wandering herbalist. Short, skinny, an unremarkable face, the kind you forget a minute after turning away. He asked to stay the night. Pak let him in. The village was used to strangers. They came and went. The herbalist stayed for 3 days. He walked around the village. He looked. He asked questions. Innocently. Where the well was. What crops they grew. How long they'd been growing them. Who was in charge. Cain was the first to notice him. Not because she suspected him. Because she saw him standing by the seed warehouse, fingering the lock. Just fingering it, not jiggling it, checking. She told Jiwoo. Jiwoo went to the herbalist. Talked, gently, without accusations. Asked what he did. The herbalist talked about his herbs. The names were correct. The properties were accurate. He knew what he was talking about. A professional. But Hyun later said his hands weren't right. A real herbalist's hands are stained with juices, green nails, calluses from grinding. This man's hands were clean, like a shopkeeper's or an alchemist's. Rena began to follow him, quietly, as best she could. A soldier's daughter, garrison training. On the 2nd night, she saw him leave the hut and walk toward the seed storehouse, a small bag in his hand. Small. Rena didn't wait. She approached from behind, placed a hand on his shoulder, a heavy one. The herbalist flinched, turned around, saw Rena and her face and realized there was no point in running. In the morning, they brought him to Jiwoo. They opened the little bag. Inside was powder, gray, fine, with a sharp chemical smell. Hein sniffed it. She recoiled. She said it was poison. Not for people, for plants. If scattered across a field or a seed warehouse, everything planted there would die in 3 days. The roots would burn. The soil would be poisoned. For years. Jiwoo looked at the powder, then at the herbalist. The herbalist was sitting on the ground. His hands were tied behind his back. His face was pale. He was silent. Rena stood over him with a sword. She wasn't threatening him. She was just standing there. That was enough. Jiwoo crouched down in front of him. He asked quietly who had sent him. The herbalist remained silent. Jiwoo asked again.
The herbalist said he couldn't speak, that they would kill him. Jiwoo asked who would kill him. The herbalist said the guild, the alchemists' guild. Master Saehee personally. Jiwoo nodded. He stood up. He knew about the guild. He'd heard from Cho. He'd heard from Minji. For 2 years, the Alchemy Guild had been selling growth potions to the court at the price of gold per vial. The potions worked for 1 day. Then the land would die for 10 years. The court bought them because there was no other choice. Hunger is worse than a dead soil in 10 years. The logic of desperation. And now a village appears on the edge of the province that grows barley and potatoes without potions, for free, consistently. The land doesn't die. It comes back to life. If the court finds out about this, why would it buy potions for gold? The guild's market is collapsing. Annual income, influence, power, everything is collapsing because of a single village and a single man with dirt under his fingernails. Of course they sent someone. Strange that it was only one. Jiwoo made a decision. Rena was against it. She wanted to interrogate him, roughly, garrison style. Chan-su wanted to tie him to a post and leave him in the square, so others could see. Pak wanted to hand him over to the county authorities. Jiwoo said no to all 3 of them. He untied the herbalist, gave him a bowl of porridge, warm, with potatoes. The herbalist stared at the bowl, confused. Jiwoo told him to eat. The herbalist ate. His hands were shaking. Porridge spilled everywhere, but he ate. When he finished, Jiwoo told him to go. Just leave. Go back to the guild. Tell the master the mission failed. Or don't say anything. Whatever he wanted. But don't come back. The herbalist stood up. He looked at Jiwoo. He didn't understand. They'd caught him with poison. They could have killed him. They could have maimed him. They could have turned him into the authorities. But they gave him porridge and let him go. He opened his mouth to say something, closed it, bowed, low, lower than necessary, left. Rena stood nearby and was silent. She was silent in a loud way, with her whole body. Jiwoo felt her silence as physical pressure. He said he knew that it was risky, that he might return with reinforcements. Rena said that wasn't the point. The point was that Jiwoo didn't understand how the world worked. In the world, there are predators and there is prey. Jiwoo behaves as if he is neither one nor the other, as if he is something else entirely. Jiwoo replied that he was an agronomist. Rena didn't smile, but the scar on her eyebrow twitched. It was close. After the incident with the herbalist, Jiwoo realized he needed protection. Not a wall, not an army, a system. Rena took charge of organizing the patrols. 4 posts around the village perimeter. 2 people per post, shifts every 6 hours. People from the village, the stronger ones, not warriors, observers. Their job was to spot and warn. Rena would do the fighting. Minji took charge of the intelligence network. Trade contacts weren't just merchants. They were drovers, servants, innkeepers, people who hear everything and everyone. Minji started paying for information. A sack of barley to whoever tells her what they're saying about Namgok in the county. 2 sacks for news from the province. Information is worth more than grain, but without it, grain cannot be preserved. A week later, Minji reported, the guild knows. Master Sogetsu knows. The herbalist returned. He told them. Not about the failure, about the porridge. About how they fed him and let him go. So Gitsu didn't believe it. He decided it was a ruse, that Jiwoo is more cunning than he seems, that he was planning something. Gitsu gathered information. He hadn't attacked yet, but he was preparing. Minji said that according to her calculations, they had 2 months, maybe 3. Then Gitsu would move from reconnaissance to action. Jiwoo took note of this. 2 months. He had to make use of them. He doubled the crops, a 3rd field, a 4th. Saehee oversaw the distribution. Ha-In monitored the health of the crops. Rena drove the workers along the canals. Minji counted the supplies and planned routes for the trade caravans. For the first time, Namgok sent grain to be sold. 3 sacks of barley to Haedong. Minji accompanied them personally. She returned after 5 days. With salt, with cloth, with tools, with news. The barley made an impression. The quality was higher than the market standard. The grains were larger, heavier, tastier. The merchants in Haedong asked where it came from. Minji didn't say. She just smiled. She counted on the abacus. She sold it for 30 mon per sack, 5 more than the price in the capital, because the barley from Namgok was better than the capital's. She brought Jiwoo a profit, 90 mon, a fortune by village standards. Jiwoo looked at the coins, then at Minji. He said she'd done well. Minji shuddered. She turned away, quickly tucked the abacus into her belt. Her hands were shaking again. She was used to her father saying she could do better. Never well done. Ji didn't know that. He just said what he thought. But she remembered it forever. The money went toward the business. Salt for pickling vegetables for the winter, fabric for workers' clothes, tools for the fields, 2 new shovels, a pickaxe, a sickle, a hoe, rope. Small change, but necessary. Minji kept track of every mon. She wrote it down on birch bark, neatly, in small handwriting. Saehee was surprised. She asked why she needed to write it down. Minji explained that money without accounting is like water without banks. It flows wherever it wants. Saehee nodded. She didn't fully understand, but she trusted her. At the end of the 3rd month, Jiwoo surveyed the land outside the village for the first time. Not a plot, not a field. The entire surrounding area. He walked for 3 days, from dawn to dusk. He placed his palms on the ground every 100 steps. The system unfolded a map. A huge one. A detailed one. He saw everything. Dead zones. Half-dead ones. Those where life still smoldered deep below. Old canals. Dozens of them. A whole network. Buried. Forgotten. But intact. Someone had built all of this hundreds of years ago. An entire irrigation system. Canals. Reservoirs. Diversions. Dams. The scale was staggering. This was no village system. It was a provincial one, covering thousands of hectares, for dozens of villages, for an entire valley. And all of it was dead, buried, forgotten, like the skeleton of a giant under a layer of dust. Jiwoo stood on the hill and looked down. He saw the ghost of what had been. A green valley, full flowing canals, rice fields stretching to the horizon, orchards, villages, life. And now, red dust and a white sky and dogs barking wearily. He clenched his fists. In a past life, he had seen this in photographs. The Aral Sea. It was, and then it was gone. It was the same here, only not the sea, but the land. An entire land that had died. And he stood in the middle of it, with a system that helped, but couldn't do everything. With a handful of people who believed but didn't understand the scale of it. And with 2 months left before the Alchemists Guild came to take away the little they'd managed to build. He returned to the village. He was silent all evening. He ate in silence. Saehee didn't ask. She had learned to read his silence. This silence meant that he was thinking, that the task was bigger than it seemed, that he was looking for a solution he couldn't yet see. At night, Jiwoo lay on a mat and stared at the ceiling. The system panel flickered before his eyes. He opened the map, zoomed out to the entire province. Red. All red. Dead. But with veins, thin ones, green. Where Namgok was, where his hands touched the earth. Tiny green dots in the middle of a sea of red. He closed his eyes, opened them. The solution was simple and impossible at the same time. Restore the network. All of it. Not just one canal. The entire ancient system. Clear the channels. Connect them to the wells. Bring water to every village in the valley. This is not a job for 30 people. For 300. For 1,000. For everyone who is here. But if it could be done, if, somehow impossibly, he could rally 1,000 starving people and make them dig and believe and work, then the valley would come alive. All of it. Entirely. Not just one village. A whole world. He fell asleep with that thought, and for the first time in 3 months, he didn't dream of dead fields, but green ones. The Alchemists Guild sent a poisoner disguised as a herbalist to destroy Namgok's seed bank. Hain and Rena exposed him. Jiwoo fed the herbalist and let him go. Minji established trade and an information network. Jiwoo discovered an ancient irrigation system spanning the entire province and decided to restore it in its entirety. The 4th month began with a gathering. Not a village meeting. An interregional one. Jiwoo sent out invitations through his students. Every student who returned to their village spread the word. Namgok invites village heads and delegates to discuss water, the future, how not to die next winter. 17 people came, from 6 villages, village heads, elders, a couple of young men with stern faces, one woman in her 40s with a headscarf and hands that had seen it all. They gathered in the square by the well, sat on mats, looked at Jiwoo, some with hope, some with suspicion, some with weary indifference. Just another promise maker, just another miracle, until proven otherwise. Jiwoo stood before them, barefoot, in a canvas shirt, with dirt under his fingernails. He spoke for 10 minutes, no more, briefly, to the point. He said that beneath their feet lay a network of canals built by their ancestors, that it was buried but intact, that if cleared, water could be brought to every village in the valley, that he knew how, that he was ready to show them. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed people, from every village. Not slaves, not day laborers, partners. Each village gets its own section of the canal, its own branch to the fields, its own seeds, its own knowledge. In return, each village sends workers to the shared sections, 10 people from each village, for a month, then a rotation. He doesn't ask you to believe him. He asks you to come, to look at Namgok's fields, to taste the bread, and decide for yourselves. Then he fell silent, sat down, waited. The silence lasted a minute, 2. Then the village elder from Chonsan spoke up,
an old man with a white beard. He said the words were beautiful. But his village had heard beautiful words from royal envoys, and from alchemists, and from priests. Everyone had promised. No one had delivered. Why would Jiwoo be any different? Jiwoo didn't answer with words. He stood up. He led the old man to the field. He showed him the barley. He let him touch an ear of grain. He showed him the potatoes. He dug up a tuber right in front of him, heavy, the size of a fist. He showed him the well, offered to draw some water. The old man drew some, took a sip, looked at the water. Clear, cold, delicious. Then Saehee brought bread, warm, with onions. The old man ate, slowly. His hands were shaking. Not from old age. He finished chewing. He looked at Jiwoo. He nodded, without a word. One by one, the delegates approached the field. They touched it. They looked at it. They tasted it. A woman with a bundle on her head knelt by the garden bed and began to cry. Quietly, without a sound. She hadn't cried for 3 years. She had saved her tears like water. Today, she couldn't hold them back. By evening, 14 of the 17 delegates had agreed. 3 villages refused. Too far away. Too few people. Too little faith. Jiwoo didn't press the issue. He said that when they were ready, they should come. There would be a place for them at the table. 14 people signed the agreement. No paper, no seals. Each took a handful of soil from Namgak's field and placed it in their own pouch. A symbol. Earth to earth. A promise. Jiwoo looked at them and thought that in a past life he had signed contracts with a pen on white paper. Here, they sign with earth. And that is stronger than any seal. Work began a week later. Workers came from the 6 villages. Not 10 from each as Jiwoo had asked. Fewer. 7. 5. 3. Whoever could. 42 people in all, plus Namgak's workers. 65 in total. 65 people against 20 kilometers of silted-up canals. Jiwoo divided the route into sections. Each village was responsible for its own section, the one leading to them. The logic was simple. You dig for your own water, not someone else's, yours. It worked. People dug with fury, not at the ground, but at the drought, at 3 years of humiliation, at empty bowls and dead old men and children sold into hard labor. All that fury went into the shovels and hoes and pickaxes. The earth cracked under the blows. Stones from old walls were laid bare. Channels emerged from the dust like veins on a hand. Jiwoo darted between the sections. He checked the slope. He read the soil. He corrected the direction. Hain walked beside him. She kept an eye on the worker's condition. That one was dehydrated. This one needed a rest. This one had overheated. She carried a little bag of herbs with her. Decoctions for the heat. Compresses for blisters. Ointment for burns. The daughter of a folk healer, now not just for plants, for people too. Rena was in charge of the toughest section, where the ground was rocky, where shovels were useless, where a pickaxe, strength, and stubbornness were needed. Rena had all of that. She stood waist deep in a ditch and struck the rock so hard that sparks flew. The workers beside her worked silently and quickly, because it was impossible to work slowly next to Rena. She didn't shout. She didn't curse. She just worked. And everyone around her worked.
Minji coordinated the supplies. Food for 65 workers, 3 times a day. Barley porridge, flatbreads, potatoes, onions, garlic, greens. She counted the portions. She calculated the expenses. She tallied the supplies. The abacus never stopped clicking. She found a salt supplier cheaper than the previous one. She negotiated a credit line with a merchant from Hedon. 3 sacks of barley now for 5 sacks after the harvest. Risky, but it had to be done. People had to eat to dig. They had to dig to get water. There had to be water to get a harvest. There had to be a harvest to pay back the debt. A cycle, a closed loop, a fragile one. One misstep, and everything would collapse. Minji carried this cycle on her shoulders, and on the abacus. 3 weeks of non-stop work, 65 people, 12 kilometers of cleared canals out of 20. 8 remained. The people were getting tired. The pace was slowing. In the 3rd week, a conflict arose. Workers from the village of Chonsan refused to dig their section. The village elder with the white beard came to Jiwoo. He said his people didn't believe it, that the water wouldn't reach them, that it was too far, that they were wasting their strength. Jiwoo went to Chonsan, 8 miles on foot, under the scorching sun. He arrived in the evening. He gathered the people. They looked at him sullenly, thin, angry, hungry, tired of believing.